Our final speaker has taken the advocacy of a state constitutional amendment limiting judicial recall into his own hands. Prepare to hear the arguments and story of a student diving headfirst into the sea of Californian politics. Please welcome senior and TEDx Youth at Sacred Heart Cathedral 2017 alum, Arrian Ebrahimi.
A couple months ago, I had the unique opportunity to go with 6 other students and teacher chaperones on the Los Angeles immersion. This was one of many immersion trips that St. Francis hosts to provide students with a better understanding of our world. Prior to this trip, my conception of LA was fairly limited. I knew Hollywood and I knew Beverly Hills, but on this trip, I got to see another side of LA, a less glamorous side, but one which opened my eyes to issues of systemic injustice in the state of California. And with further thought, I realized that these issues hit very close to our home of Santa Clara County. On the 3rd day of our trip, we walked through a slum called Skid Row. This hole of hopelessness is infamously known as the largest homeless encampment west of the Mississippi, and similar stories of cycling in and out of the criminal justice system pervade the lives of its inhabitants. Seeing this sea of poverty within view of the shining hilltops of Hollywood, I grew upset. My anger stems from the racism that created this hole of hopelessness, but more importantly, the government that keeps it alive and growing. Amazingly, miles away on the opposite side of the state, a campaign calling for the recall of Santa Clara County Superior Court Judge Aaron Persky threatens to worsen the situation. The story begins with the infamous case of Stanford swimmer Brock Allen Turner and the ruling of Judge Aaron Persky. In 2016, Turner was accused of sexually assaulting an unconscious woman, and state law would have allowed the presiding judge, Persky, to sentence Turner for up to 14 years in state prison. And the prosecution, District Attorney Jeff Rosen, called for a prison term. To the shock of many, Persky sentenced Turner to 6 months in county jail with probation and lifelong registration as a sexual offender. Many people have denounced this ruling as unjust and called for Persky's resignation, but the reality is, his ruling was legally sound. A campaign started by Professor Michelle Dauber of Stanford University has advocated the recall, meaning removal from elected office, of Judge Persky, and on January 23rd, the recall campaign submitted enough signatures to place the judge's recall on the ballot this June. Now, I am not here to discuss whether or not Aaron Persky is a good judge, nor am I here to comment on his ruling in the Turner case. I am here to discuss a greater issue, a constitutional issue, an issue that spans over a century of Californian history. I am here to discuss judicial recall, a status quo that has gone unquestioned, but which strikes at the core of the issues facing California's criminal justice system today. In the modern era, recall jeopardizes the ability of state judges to act independently and breeds a culture of vengeance and cruelty that most adversely affects poor and minority defendants. The United States is a democratic republic. Our government is constantly faced with making hard decisions that are unpopular but necessary for the good of society. Accordingly, the majority of legislation is decided upon by elected representatives of the people, not by the people themselves. And similarly, the task of ruling on the legality of cases falls to the hands of judges, not the people themselves. In the majority of states, judges enjoy relative judicial independence for the majority of their terms. Unfortunately, however, in 8 states, including our beloved California, there exists a direct democracy device called Judicial Recall. Judicial Recall is the ability of voters, through petition, to initiate a ballot measure calling for the removal of a judge, regardless of legal justification. In California, state judges already face re-election every 6 years and are subject to removal by the nonpartisan State Commission on Judicial Performance. But recall serves to expedite the process. This system of judicial recall jeopardizes judicial independence. If a judge fears immediate retribution by the people because of her or his legal ruling on an unpopular case, that judge may be incentivized to rule adversely in order to avoid the public panic that may lead to recall. Now, proponents of recall claim that this tool provides for a high level of public responsiveness in the judiciary. This is correct, but not necessarily a good thing. Most people are not legal experts. It is therefore certain that the majority of voters on the ballot will not have a strong understanding of the law and are thus unqualified to assess the legality of a judge's actions. If constituents take issue with the result of a legal ruling, then the proper outlet to be pursued is the legislative branch, where the law can be revised. Ultimately, while it can certainly be said that voters understand the effects that a judicial decision can have on their lives, an unpopular ruling does not necessarily constitute an illegal ruling. Now, I have just described the abstract issues of judicial recall, but how does judicial recall translate into real-life injustice? The Brennan Center for Justice at NYU studied judges in Pennsylvania and Washington and found that, quote, pressures of upcoming re-election campaigns affect judicial decision-making in criminal cases, making judges more likely to impose longer sentences, affirm death sentences, and even override sentences of life imprisonment to impose the death penalty. Let that sink in. If judicial elections, which happen only once every 6 years, have the potential to skew how judges rule, then judicial recall, where judges face scrutiny constantly, is a terrifying threat to judicial independence because it incentivizes judges to adversely rule more harshly. Here's where the real-life injustice comes in. As Georgetown law professor Sean Hopwood describes, poor and minority defendants are the most vulnerable to judges who are bent towards harsher sentencing because these individuals cannot afford the expensive legal counsel required to defend themselves against the rulings of a politically motivated judge. Resultantly, judicial recall most adversely hurts the defenseless. Furthermore, to truly help society, our criminal justice system should be focusing on rehabilitation, not incarceration. With judicial independence, judges have the freedom to make the politically unpopular choices of giving more lenient sentences that can truly help reform defendants. For example, instead of sentencing a low-level drug offender to a year in county jail, a judge could make the often politically unpopular choice of sentencing that individual to probation and mandatory involvement in a recovery program. Judicial recall threatens the ability of judges to prioritize rehabilitation over incarceration and helps maintain California's title as the prison capital of the country. So, what can be done to solve this? I would like to make it clear that this issue is, at its core, a quest to strike balance between the issues of judicial independence and judicial responsiveness. Both of these are critical pillars for our judiciary. However, California far too heavily favors responsiveness at the cost of independence. My solution is a big one. There must be a state constitutional amendment limiting judicial recall to only cases of proven judicial misconduct. This prerequisite of misconduct would be determined by the Nonpartisan State Commission on Judicial Performance, a body designed to review the actions of all judges and reprimand or remove them if they engage in misconduct. I have been circulating a statement calling for just that among members of the California legal community. In just a few months, this statement has garnered over 65 signatures. 4 law professors, 4 Superior Court judges, 6 private attorneys, 2 district attorneys, and 55 public defenders, women and men whose job it is to defend the defenseless. I hope to soon take this proposal to our elected representatives in the state Senate and Assembly where, after being put to the floor for a vote, I hope it will begin a conversation statewide about the need to reform our judiciary. We proudly call California the Golden State. But at the same time, ours is one of only 8 states that allow judicial recall. A truly equitable justice system requires judges who objectively assess the culpability of offenders and, without regard to public opinion, hand down rulings that are in accordance with the law. Such a system also requires trustworthy methods for the removal of misbehaving or incompetent judges that are legally informed and which balance the need for responsiveness and independence. A state constitutional amendment limiting judicial recall will accomplish this. Such reform will help bring justice to the most vulnerable in our criminal justice system. This issue goes beyond any individual judge. It is a question of balance. It is a question of proper government. It is a question of justice. Thank you very much.